The Wild West was no stranger to cruelty, but in Dry Hollow, cruelty came wearing the face of a mother, sold like cattle. Sadie Harper, 8 months pregnant, was handed to a man haunted by 7 unmarked graves. Wyatt Callahan had lost everything that made him human, burying his children and his laughter in the same dry soil. Together they lived in silence, hers forged from fear, his from grief. But when fire swept the valley and life demanded to be born in its flames, they would discover that sometimes love does not whisper, it screams its way into the world. The last heat of a desert afternoon clung to the walls of Dry Hollow, a town barely held together by cracked timber grit and regret. Behind the feed store, where old tools rusted beside broken saddles, a different kind of trade was being made. Not grain or guns, not even cattle. A woman. Sadie Harper was 8 months pregnant when her mother shackled her wrists and dragged her into that shadowed alley. Her skin bore the bruises of control, and her silence, chosen armored, was the last thing she had left that hadn't been sold. She didn't cry, not when the cuffs bit into her, not when the voices argued over her like she was a mule with a bad hoof. She sat on the packed dirt, her belly heavy, her stare empty. She don't need a doctor. She needs a man to keep her quiet, the mother hissed, her breath sharp with the tang of cheap gin. Opposite her stood Wyatt Callahan, tall, broad, weather-worn, a man who looked like he hadn't smiled in a decade and hadn't slept in half as long. His hat shadowed his eyes, but the scar cutting across his cheek said enough. He was no stranger to hard choices. Still, something about this exchange made him pause. "I'm not looking for a wife," he said, lowly voice hoarse from disuse. "I'm looking for peace." The trade was made without a handshake. 2 silver coins, a half-empty jug of rye, and a scribbled note promising a side of beef come winter. No goodbyes, no blessing. Just a mother walking away as if she'd just pawned an old coat. Wyatt didn't touch Sadie. He didn't lead her. He simply turned toward his horse and waited. She followed slower than the wind, her eyes rimmed red not from tears, but from holding them in. The ride to his ranch took them through sun-bleached pines and into a valley that felt like the edge of nowhere. His home was modest, a cabin with sagging shutters and a porch that had forgotten the sound of laughter. No dog, no flowers, just woodwind and stillness. When they arrived, Wyatt helped her down, offering a simple nod instead of instruction. He led her inside. The air within was startlingly clean. No sour whiskey, no cigar smoke. Just pine wood fire soot and something faintly sweet lemongrass or maybe old soap. "There," he said, pointing to a room off the hall. "Bed's dry. There's water on the stove. I won't bother you." Sadie didn't answer. Her hand hovered near the side of her boot, where a small blade was stitched into the leather. She didn't trust kindness, not after learning how easily it curdled. But she nodded and stepped inside. The room was unexpectedly soft. A patchwork quilt lay over a sturdy bed, and beside the dresser sat a brush, a clean shawl, and a pair of shoes untouched by mud. It wasn't a prison, but it felt like one because anything that nice had to come with strings. That night, as coyotes cried to a half-moon, Sadie lay on her side, one hand on her belly, the other wrapped around her knife. The baby kicked. She didn't cry. She didn't sleep. The silence around her was thick, unfamiliar. But just before dawn, she slipped from bed and crept toward the front room. She expected to find him watching her, waiting. Instead, Wyatt knelt on the porch beneath the stars, stitching a torn saddle strap by lamplight. Rain was falling, soaking his shirt, but he worked with care. "She said this place needed fixin'," he murmured to the leather. Didn't just mean the fence. He didn't see her at first, and when he did, he only said, "Couldn't sleep." She shook her head. He nodded and kept stitching. That was the first moment she realized something he hadn't bought her to use her. He hadn't spoken much, but in that silence was something deeper than control. Maybe grief. Maybe something still healing. She returned to bed and hid the knife, not out of trust, but because fear didn't feel quite as necessary anymore. Sadie Harper woke every morning in Wyatt Callahan's house to silence, not the kind she had grown up with, sharp and waiting to explode, but a gentler kind. Still, her body didn't know the difference yet. Her nerves stayed taut, like a string pulled too tight. Even though he hadn't raised a hand or voice, fear had worn grooves into her bones. Trust was a far country, and she had no horse to get there. She explored the cabin cautiously always, with one hand near the blade hidden in her boot. The place had an odd sort of order. The kitchen shelves were neatly stocked beans, cornmeal, dried jerky. The hearth was swept clean. A set of spoons, whittled by hand, sat in a tin cup beside the stove. There were signs of life, but no signs of company. No extra boots by the door. No children's laughter in the air. Just one man's routine, worn into the floorboards. Each morning before she rose, Wyatt left fresh cornbread on the kitchen table, warm buttered and split in half, as if silently offering her the better piece. A pot of coffee usually steamed beside it, strong and slightly bitter. He never left notes, just those offerings, simple, steady, without obligation. At first, Sadie didn't touch the food. She watched it for hours, waiting for the trap. When nothing happened, she ate one small bite at a time, and when that didn't come with a slap or demand, she started eating a little more. Her body was hungry. The baby inside her was always moving, demanding more life than she thought she had to give. Wyatt, for his part, kept his distance. He spent most of his days out in the fields or mending fences, saying little. When he passed her in the hall, he nodded just once. His eyes never lingered, never asked questions. He didn't speak to her like a man speaks to a wife or even a servant. He treated her like a ghost he wasn't ready to believe in. The silence between them grew thick. Not threatening, just heavy. And that heaviness made Sadie doubt herself, doubt her instincts. Was this safety, or just the quiet before another storm? One day she dared to step outside, just to breathe. The wind was sharp that afternoon, kicking up dust from the dry trails. She stood on the porch, wrapped in a shawl Wyatt had left folded by the foot of her bed. It smelled faintly of cedar and lye. She didn't hear the wagon until it rolled into view. A woman climbed down, tall, lean, wrapped in a black bonnet like a noose. Her boots cracked the dirt as she marched toward the porch. Mud clung to her hem. Her jaw was set like granite. Wyatt Callahan. She barked, eyes narrow. He appeared from the side of the barn, hammer in one hand, his shirt rolled to the elbows. "Martha," he said, tone unreadable. Sadie froze. Her hand gripped the edge of the porch rail. "I came for eggs," Martha snapped. "And to see the girl you brought in." Sadie's heart dropped. There was no protection in the air, just the dry scrape of judgment. Martha looked her over once, slow and cold. 8 months gone and already here with you. Town says you took in a stray like she's a damn wounded bird. Ain't even buried your wife a full year, and now this." Wyatt said nothing. He didn't flinch, didn't defend, just stood there breathing steady. Martha's voice curled with venom. "What is she to you? A mouth to feed, a bed to warm, a scandal to outlive your sorrow. Still nothing. You always did have a taste for broken things," she spat. Sadie's hands curled into fists, her belly tightening with discomfort. She wanted to speak, to scream, to tell this woman she knew nothing, but she held her tongue. That blade in her boot felt heavier now, like the only thing left that was hers. Wyatt turned without a word, walked into the house, and came back with a small basket of eggs. He held them out. Martha snatched them with a sneer, glaring at Sadie like she was something sticky left behind on a barn floor. "She won't last. Trash never does," she hissed. Wyatt said nothing. He placed one hand on the door and shut it with a quiet finality that echoed louder than any gunshot. Sadie stood rooted to the porch long after Martha's wagon disappeared into the dust. Her chest burned not with shame, but confusion. Why hadn't he defended her? Why hadn't he told that woman she was wrong? Didn't he see what it cost her to even stand there? Later that evening, she sat by the fire, brushing her hair in the mirror of her small room. The portrait of a woman Wyatt's wife, she guessed, watched from above the fireplace mantel. A quiet face, not smiling, not mourning, just watching. Sadie stared at her reflection, her fingers moving slowly through her tangles. "He's more afraid of their words than mine," she whispered to the woman in the picture. "And maybe I'm just easier to carry than guilt." She realized something then. Wyatt hadn't bought her because he wanted her. He'd bought her because he couldn't fix what was broken in himself, and maybe didn't know how to be alone with the grief any longer. She was company that didn't talk, a new silence to replace the old. But she was not a ghost, and she was not going to stay invisible forever. From that day forward, she started stepping farther into the house, into the spaces that had belonged to someone else. The front room, the woodshed, the hen coop out back. She swept. She fed the fire. She boiled herbs she didn't know the names of. Slowly, without asking, she stitched herself into the edges of his world. One afternoon, Wyatt left a new coat folded on the porch bench. No note, of course, just wool thick and warm, stitched with care. Sadie held it close, unsure what it meant, but she wore it the next morning anyway. Not because she trusted him, but because she had decided this: if she was going to be in this story, she would not be its ghost. She would be seen. She would take up space. Even if all she had was silence to work with. The days passed with the hush of early winter, subtle changes that went mostly unspoken. Frost clinging longer to the windows, the woodpile shrinking faster than Wyatt liked, Sadie's gait slowing under the growing weight of her unborn child. They rarely spoke, and when they did, it was through tasks. She peeled potatoes. He sharpened blades. She patched holes in the window curtains. He hammered new shingles onto the shed, side by side, but never truly shoulder to shoulder. And yet something had shifted since Martha's visit. Not suddenly, not loudly, but like the cracking of ice beneath the surface of a still pond. It wasn't just that Sadie lingered in the kitchen longer, humming under her breath, or that Wyatt began leaving her extra firewood stacked with care under the awning where the snow couldn't reach. It was how the silence changed. No longer a wall, more like a waiting room. Sadie caught him once through the kitchen window. He was standing near the ridge that overlooked the back pasture, the wind tugging at his coat. In his hands he held a tiny pink dress, soft, handmade. He wasn't mending it, just holding it like a man trying to remember something he wished he could forget. She didn't confront him that day, but something inside her cracked open, something like understanding. That night a storm rolled through. The wind screamed against the cabin walls and the shutters rattled like bones. She couldn't sleep. Her baby kicked wildly as if sensing the world outside was trembling. So she rose, pulled on a thick shawl, and followed the flicker of lantern light down the hall. The front room was dim lit only by a single oil lamp. Wyatt sat in the old rocking chair near the hearth, not asleep, not fully awake either. The fire was low, casting shadows up his face. On his lap lay the dress again, frayed at the hem, but still delicate. "She made it," he said without turning his voice like gravel, soaked in regret. "After the third." Sadie didn't answer. She didn't know how. She kept believing he continued, eyes on the fire now. Each time she swore the next one would live. The words hit Sadie like stones dropped in a quiet river. How many, she asked, barely a whisper. He looked at her then, not sharply, not angrily, just with a kind of sorrow that settled into his shoulders like an old wound. 7. he said. Sadie sat slowly across from him, her hands folding around her belly. She buried each one behind the ridge, Wyatt said. Boys, girls, we never named them. By the 7th, there was nothing left to say. A silence stretched between them. Thick, sacred. I thought you bought me to replace her, Sadie admitted, eyes fixed on the dancing firelight. I didn't buy you to replace anyone, Wyatt said. I bought you because I didn't know how to let someone live here again. Sadie blinked back something warm. You don't talk about her much. He shook his head. Talking didn't bring her back, didn't keep any of them alive. She wanted to touch his hand, but didn't. She wasn't sure either of them was ready for that. I'm not her, she said. I know. I'm not a ghost. I know that too. She stood and left him there, the pink dress still in his lap. That night her dreams were heavy, full of crying babies and hands she couldn't hold on to. But when she woke, the fire had been stoked, and on her nightstand lay a sprig of rosemary, for remembrance. Later that week, after Wyatt left for town, Sadie wrapped herself in her shawl and followed the path behind the barn, the one he never told her not to walk. It led up the ridge through brittle grass and patches of melting snow. At the top, she found them 7 small wooden markers tilted by time and weather. No names, just numbers carved deep. She knelt by the 7th. The earth there was newer, the grass still struggling. A small wildflower leaned against the base, stunted and half-frozen. She touched the wood, and for a moment it felt warm beneath her palm. Maybe it was just the sun. Or maybe something lingered there, something stubborn and soft, like memory refusing to rot. Wyatt didn't speak when he found her up there, just stood quietly, his hat in his hands. I thought maybe you'd hurt her, Sadie whispered, staring at the marker, or that she left because of me. He shook his head. She died, he said, not all at once, but in pieces, one child at a time. Sadie turned to face him. You never told anyone. No point, Wyatt said. Folks believe what they want. Arguing takes more breath than silence. She rose slowly. You tried to plant roses here, didn't you? He looked surprised. How'd you know? Found the bulbs, some still in the dirt. They never bloomed, he said. Wind always took the petals. Maybe this spring, she said. For a moment something shifted in his face, not quite hope, but the echo of it. The wind had teeth that night. Sadie was just finishing supper when she caught the scent smoke not from the hearth, but raw, wild wind-blown. Wyatt burst through the front door a heartbeat later, coat half-buttoned, boots muddy from a rushed ride up the ridge. Fires jumped Briar Valley, he said, breath short. Wind's feeding it hard. It's coming this way. Sadie moved toward the window, brushing back the gingham curtain. On the distant hillside, orange streaks licked the sky like furious tongues devouring trees and brush alike. Her heart dropped into her stomach. We've got to go, Wyatt said, already soaking cloths and pulling down blankets from the hooks. Stone Hut North Trail. It's dug into the rock. Fire can't touch it. But when Sadie turned to grab her coat, a pain split through her lower back like a crack in the earth. She gasped, folding against the table's edge. Wyatt was beside her in a flash, steadying her with both hands. No, she whispered, panic rising. Not now. Another contraction seized her body sharper, deeper. Her breath came in broken fragments. It's time, Wyatt said, voice tight. We can't stay here. With fire at their heels and birth on the brink, he wrapped her in dampened blankets and lifted her against his chest, her belly pressed between them. The heat outside clawed at their backs as he kicked the door open and stepped into the choking smoke. The trail twisted through gnarled brush and broken ground, half of it scorched already, the other half waiting to burn. Ash rained from the sky. Sparks danced like demons in the air. Sadie whimpered against Wyatt's shoulder as her body heaved again. "I can't," she cried out. "I can't do this." "You can," he grunted, tightening his grip. "You will." With each step, the fire screamed louder. The trees groaned in agony. The world behind them melted into flame. And then stone. Cool, gray, salvation. The old birthing hut, part cave, part forgotten memory, stood hunched against the hillside. Wyatt kicked the door open and carried Sadie inside, laying her down on a straw-padded floor. The fire's roar became a distant growl behind the stone walls. But inside, another storm, brewed raw, wholly terrifying. Sadie screamed through each contraction, clutching Wyatt's hand so tightly her nails dug crescents into his skin. He knelt beside her, wiping her brow, whispering, "You're not alone." Not this time. He'd been there before. Too many times. 7 times holding a hand that went cold, burying what never had a name. But this time was different. This time he fought not just for the baby, but for the woman who still had fire in her soul. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, time warped by pain and prayer. And then a cry. High-pitched, fierce, alive. The sound pierced the hush like a gospel. Wyatt caught the child slippery and new and placed her gently in Sadie's arms. Sadie looked down at the bundle slick with birth and burning with life and wept. "It's a girl," she gasped, laughing through her tears. "She's perfect." Wyatt's chest shook with something too big for words. "What'll we call her?" he asked, voice frayed. Sadie didn't hesitate. "Lily." He repeated it under his breath like a secret prayer. Lily. But joy was not finished testing them. The smoke returned thin at first, creeping through cracks in the stone like regret. Wyatt slumped against the wall, his breath ragged. His skin was pale, streaked with soot. His eyes fluttered, unfocused. Wyatt Sadie's voice sharpened. "Hey, stay with me." He didn't answer. Panic seized her. She pressed Lily to her chest with one arm and reached for Wyatt with the other, his wrist limp, his chest still. For a moment the world went utterly still. Then Lily screamed loud, furious, full of defiance. Wyatt gasped. Air rattled into his lungs. "She's got lungs," he rasped, a flicker of a smile ghosting across his face. Sadie laughed through sobs clinging to both of them. Smoke may have touched them, but it hadn't taken them. They lived. And in the morning, as dawn broke over the scorched hills, Sadie stepped out of the hut with Lily tucked against her chest. The world was gray with ash, but the sky blushed gold with morning. Behind her, Wyatt leaned on the doorframe alive, but changed. She turned to him. "We made it." He didn't speak, just nodded as if afraid that breaking the silence would break the miracle too. A year later, the fire existed only in memory. The homestead had been rebuilt. Not grand, not flawless, but whole. Lily toddled barefoot in the yard, her curls wild in the wind, her chubby fist wrapped around a rose plucked from the bush by the porch. Not all the roses bloomed, but some did. That was enough. Sadie watched from the porch, one hand on her hip, the other resting on her growing belly. Wyatt stood beside her, his hand warm on her back. He wasn't just a man who had survived sorrow now, he was a father. A husband in everything but name, a builder of second chances. "You planted roses again," she said. "They don't always bloom," he replied. "They don't have to. Some things grow just because we believe they can." Lily laughed, chasing a butterfly. Her joy split the air like sun through smoke. And Sadie whispered, "Miracles don't always come soft. Sometimes they come screaming through fire." The weeks after the fire carried a quiet that wasn't hollow but sacred. The land, though scarred, seemed to breathe again. The birds returned first, then the wind changed its tone, and then one day the ground outside Wyatt's cabin, once a graveyard of failed roots, offered something unexpected. A rose. Not many, not perfect, but one. Sadie had spotted it near the fence as she hung damp linens to dry. The bloom was small, its petals pale pink and trembling in the breeze as if unsure of its own right to exist. But it stood tall, stubborn alive. When she showed it to Wyatt, he only stared at it for a long while. Then he whispered, "I planted 100. Figured they all died." "Maybe this one didn't know it was supposed to," Sadie said, cradling Lily on her hip. That night, as the fire in the hearth crackled, Sadie fed Lily warm goat's milk from a carved spoon. Wyatt sat in his usual chair, carving another, this one smaller, with Lily's name etched faintly on the handle. It was the first time they said the name aloud in front of her. She squealed, then banged the spoon against the floor as if in approval. The home began to change, not suddenly, but steadily. Wyatt patched the roof. Sadie washed the curtains, then replaced them with hand-sewn ones she'd made from spare feed sack cloth. They built shelves together, mended window panes, and turned the dusty storage room into a nursery corner. Wyatt even sanded down the porch rails, smoothing the splinters so Lily wouldn't catch one. Everywhere there were signs of life, not grand, not loud, but resilient. A second-hand cradle from the trading post. A clay pot filled with marigolds. Letters from women in town who once turned their backs on Sadie, now folded with apologies, sometimes with dried apple slices tucked inside. And once, just once, a child came. A boy no older than 8. He stood at the fence, clutching a ragged bouquet of dandelions. When Sadie asked where he was from, he just shrugged and said Mama said to say sorry. She yelled before, but she didn't mean it. Then he handed her the flowers and ran. Sadie stood there long after he left, the stem still damp in her hand. In the evenings, Wyatt started reading again, slowly, his finger following each line of the old Bible Sadie kept beside the lamp. Not for faith, perhaps, but for rhythm, a ritual, something that felt like forward. Sadie would cook while he read. He'd stop at verses that made him furrow his brow, then reread them as if trying to shape them into meaning. "What does it mean," he once asked, "when it says, 'Restore unto me the joy of thy salvation'?" She didn't answer right away. Then, brushing hair from Lily's forehead, she said softly, "I think it means not just being saved, but being glad to be." Wyatt stared at her, his face unreadable. But later that night she found her old dress hanging near the door, newly stitched at the seams. As Lily grew, so did the house. So did Sadie. She laughed more, stood straighter. She began teaching Wyatt to cook, though he still burned half the cornbread and oversalted the beans. They laughed over it anyway. Spring warmed into summer. Lily started to walk first, a few wobbling steps from the rocking chair to Wyatt's boots. Then from the kitchen hearth to the porch. She'd fall, giggle, then try again. Every scrape was met with Sadie's kiss. Every triumph with Wyatt's soft, gravel-edged atta-girl. Then came the afternoon Wyatt found Sadie in the garden staring at the rose bushes. He crouched beside her. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking she's not the only thing that grew where nothing was supposed to." He followed her gaze, saw not just the roses, but the clothesline strung between 2 birches. The toys scattered near the porch, a quilt airing in the wind. "You mean the garden?" he asked, voice cautious. Sadie turned to face him. Her eyes held something steady. "I mean us." He didn't answer. Not right away. Just picked up a handful of soil and let it fall through his fingers. Later, after Lily was asleep, they sat on the porch. A warm breeze moved through the grass. Stars blinked to life above them. Sadie leaned against his shoulder. "I don't need a preacher," she said. Wyatt looked down at her brows, furrowed. "I don't need a ring. I don't need permission." She paused, then added, "But I do need to know if we're choosing this. Not because of smoke and survival, but because we believe something can grow." He exhaled long and low, the kind of breath a man releases when he's ready to carry truth. "I buried so much," he said. "I thought if I didn't speak, maybe the pain would stay quiet too. But you—" He paused, voice shaking. "You brought noise. I needed. Laughter, crying, cradle-rocking noise. And I wanted." She took his hand. "You sure I'm not sure of many things," he said, "but I'm sure of you." Sadie smiled, then whispered, "Me too." That summer, they didn't plan a wedding. They didn't need to. Their vows were in the garden, the supper table, the creak of the floor when Lily toddled at dawn. The neighbors noticed anyway. A few women brought baked pies. Some left candles. One who had once called Sadie a barefoot stray came with hand-knit socks and said nothing. That was enough. In August, Wyatt built a wooden swing on the old oak by the barn. Lily loved it, shrieking as she flew toward the clouds. One afternoon, Sadie stood behind her belly round again with new life, laughing through her fingers. Wyatt watched them, his hand pressed to the post he'd carved the swing into. "You made a family," he whispered to no one in particular. Sadie heard him anyway. "No," she said. "We made it. From ashes." The roses bloomed fully that fall. Not all of them, not perfectly, but enough. By the time winter rolled in again, the house on the edge of nowhere no longer felt like a place people were sent to disappear. It felt like a place chosen, built not from bricks or blueprints, but from quiet mornings and hard-earned forgiveness. A home stitched from survival and softened by second chances. Inside the walls no longer echoed with loss. They carried laughter now, the small kind that comes from ticklish feet, mispronounced words, or a baby's squeal when her father lifts her too high. They carried the creak of the rocker, the clatter of spoons on mismatched bowls, and the low hum of Sadie's voice when she sang Lily to sleep. Outside, the ground had learned to give again. The rose bushes, once stubborn and skeletal, held blossoms into the cold. Not many, not showy, but alive. And that was enough. Wyatt walked the fence line each morning with Lily bundled in a sling across his chest. He'd point at deer tracks in the frost, pause to fix a broken post, or just stand still while she cooed against his heartbeat. He no longer feared the silence, it had become his prayer. Sadie, too, was changing. No longer the girl hunched by the fire gripping a knife. No longer the woman watching every move for signs of threat. She moved through the home like she belonged. Because now she did. She laughed more. She rested more. She even started writing letters, slow, careful words she never thought she'd send. One was to her mother. She didn't send it, but she wrote it anyway, and tucked it into the back of her Bible like a memory she had chosen to set down rather than carry. By the time their second child arrived, another girl with a howl like thunder and hair as dark as coal, they didn't need to ask what she'd be named. Hope. Because that's what she was. That's what they all were. Hope that families aren't always born, they're built. That love doesn't need permission. That even from betrayal and silence and scorched earth, something beautiful can rise if someone is willing to stay to water what others abandoned and to believe in the bloom. Some nights when the wind was soft and the fire low, Sadie would hold Lily close and whisper the story of how she came to be, not in shame, but in truth. She'd speak of a quiet man with calloused hands and eyes that had seen too much, who never said "I love you" with words, but did with every action. She'd tell Lily that her name came not from beauty, but from survival. From a flower that bloomed where the soil said nothing could. from a girl who walked out of fire and into light, from a man who stayed even when staying hurt, and when the girls fell asleep, curled into each other like roots in warm earth. Wyatt would kiss Sadie's knuckles and whisper into her shoulder, "We got it right, didn't we?" And she would answer, "We grew something real." And the house, once silent, would hold that truth like a hymn, whispered through wood grain, soft, steady, and forever. In the quiet spaces between tragedy and triumph, this story reminds us that healing does not always arrive with fanfare. It often enters in silence, in patience, and in presence. Sadie and Wyatt's journey teaches us that brokenness is not the end, but the beginning of something raw, sacred, and real. Life will take from us sometimes brutally, but it also offers us moments of choice. We can choose bitterness, or we can choose to plant something even when the ground seems too hard. The roses that eventually bloom on Wyatt's ranch are more than flowers. They're a testament to faith without certainty, to effort without guarantees. And so it is with love, trust, and family. They grow not because the world approves, but because someone dares to nurture them anyway. This story also speaks powerfully to the redemptive act of staying. Wyatt didn't heal Sadie by fixing her, and Sadie didn't resurrect Wyatt with affection alone. What they did quietly and stubbornly was stay. Through fire, memory, labor pains, and grief they showed up. And in a world that often glorifies grand gestures and perfect endings, this story honors the miracle of everyday survival, of waking up making tea, mending fences, and daring to dream of roses in soil that has known only loss. At its heart, the message is clear: you are not what others have done to you. You are not your mistakes or your silence. You are what you choose to grow in their place. And sometimes, the most defiant, most holy thing we can do in this world is simply to believe that something good, something real, can grow from the ash. If this story touched you, please share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to Whispers of the West so you won't miss the next journey through the Wild West, where darkness, loss, and healing walk side by side. Your support is the greatest encouragement for me to keep bringing stories that speak to the heart.